Hello and Namaskar. मैं हूं आदित्य जैन and I welcome you to this video series. I have been associated with UPSC for 5 years. I have also mentored students for UPSC and State PSCs as well. So I'll make sure इस वीडियो सीरीज से आपके मार्क्स मैक्सिमाइज हों. Here we'll cover Spectrum Publications Modern India by Rajiv Ahir का लेटेस्ट एडिशन. इस बुक को थोरोली रीड करने के साथ इंपॉर्टेंट सेक्शंस हाईलाइट किए जाएंगे और साथ ही यूपीएससी एंड स्टेट पीएससीज में आए हुए क्वेश्चंस भी बताए जाएंगे so that you never miss the important part. There will be 50 to 55 lectures of 30 to 35 minutes each. अगर आपने ये सीरीज़ 3 से 4 बार देख ली तो ये बुक डेफिनेटली आपके दिमाग में छप जाएगी एंड आपका रिवीजन भी आसान हो जाएगा. तो अगर आपको रिवीजन के साथ साथ वैल्यू एडिशन भी करना है तो ये सीरीज़ पूरी देखें. आपको बस अपने पास ये बुक रखना है और सुन के जो मैं बताऊँ वो हाईलाइट करना है. सो विदाउट एनी फर्दर डिले लेट्स गेट स्टार्टेड.
हेलो एस्पिरेंट्स, वेलकम टू घटना सूत्र. सो वी शैल कंटिन्यू फ्रॉम वेयर वी लेफ्ट. हम पढ़ रहे थे चैप्टर 28 इकोनॉमिक इम्पैक्ट ऑफ ब्रिटिश रूल इन इंडिया. ठीक है, इसके बारे में ब्रीफिंग चाहिए है तो आप लास्ट वीडियो के लास्ट पार्ट में देख सकते हैं. आखिरी के 5 मिनट में ये पढ़ाया गया है. देन अगेन वी शैल कंटिन्यू. डी इंडस्ट्रियलाइजेशन पढ़ रहे थे हम. अब पढ़ेंगे एम्पावरमेंट ऑफ पीजेंट्री. उसके पहले एक क्वेश्चन देख लीजिए आप, प्रीवियस ईयर का यूपीएससी 2020 का ये क्वेश्चन है. ठीक है, PYQ है ये, PYQ. ठीक है, बहुत इंपॉर्टेंट है. इसमें दिया हुआ है विच ऑफ द फॉलोइंग स्टेटमेंट्स करेक्टली एक्सप्लेन द इम्पैक्ट ऑफ इंडस्ट्रियल रेवोल्यूशन ऑन इंडिया ड्यूरिंग द फर्स्ट हाफ ऑफ द 19th सेंचुरी. ठीक है ना, हम अभी वही बात कर रहे थे, वही फेज की बात कर रहे थे यहाँ पे, राइट. तो आप उसके हिसाब से वो क्या बोलना चाह रहे हैं समझ रहे हैं ना, कि फर्स्ट हाफ ऑफ द 19th सेंचुरी में इंडस्ट्रियल रेवोल्यूशन की बात करी गई, इंडिया में कैसा रहा. तो इसमें ऑप्शन है इंडियन हैंडीक्राफ्ट्स वर रून्ड, मशीन्स वर इंट्रोड्यूस्ड इन द टेक्सटाइल इंडस्ट्री इन लार्ज नंबर्स, रेलवे लाइंस वर लेड इन मैनी पार्ट्स ऑफ द कंट्री. हैवी, देखो ये गलत है, मैनी पार्ट्स ऑफ द कंट्री नहीं, सिर्फ वहां हुआ था जहां जहां ब्रिटिशर्स को अपना वहां इकोनॉमिक फायदा दिख रहा था. हैवी ड्यूटीज वर इम्पोज्ड ऑन द इम्पोर्ट्स ऑफ ब्रिटिश मैन्युफैक्चर, गलत है ना, एक्सपोर्ट्स पे हैवी ड्यूटीज थी. इंडियन हैंडीक्राफ्ट्स वर रून्ड, ये आंसर है इसका. ठीक है, ए है ना, ये सब हम यहाँ पे पढ़ चुके हैं. इंडियन हैंडीक्राफ्ट्स वर रून्ड, ये पूरा आप हम समझे, ये पूरा वही लिखा हुआ है. इंडियन हैंडीक्राफ्ट्स वर रून्ड यहाँ पर हम अच्छे से पढ़ चुके हैं. ठीक है ना. सो देखिए ये हैंडीक्राफ्ट्स यहाँ पे लिखा हुआ है, यहाँ पे सारा पूरा, राइट. तो इसका आंसर यही है. नाउ देन मूविंग ऑन, एम्पावरमेंट मतलब एम्पावरमेंट ऑफ पीजेंट्री. The government only interested in maximization of rent and in securing its share of revenue had enforced the permanent settlement system in large parts. ये हम पढ़ चुके हैं. Transferability of land was one feature of the new settlement which caused great insecurity to the tenants who lost all their traditional rights in land. There was a little spending by the government on the empowerment of land productivity. The zamindar with the increased power resorted to some eviction, demanded illegal dues and begar to maximize their share in the produce, and as such had no incentive to invest for the improvement of agriculture. The overburdened peasantry had to approach the moneylenders to be able to pay their dues to the zamindars. The moneylenders, who was often also the village grain merchants, forced the farmers to sell produce at low prices to clear their dues. The powerful moneylender was also able to manipulate the judiciary and law in his favor. The peasant turned out to be the ultimate sufferer under the triple burden of the government, zamindar and moneylender. His hardship increased at the time of famine and scarcity. This was as much true for the zamindari areas as areas for under Rayatwari and Malwari system. The peasant became landless. ठीक है ना? Okay. तो wait. So moving on. Emergence of intermediaries, absentees, lapsed landlordism, ruins of old zamindar. ठीक है ना. एक्सक्यूज मी. देखिए इसके ऊपर एक मेंस का भी क्वेश्चन आया हुआ है. ठीक है ना. ये थोड़ा सा हम बाद में पढ़ लेंगे तो ज्यादा अच्छा रहेगा. ओके, ये देखिए ये ओवरऑल क्वेश्चन है मेंस का. ठीक है ना, ये आप समझ लीजिए मेंस का 2014 का क्वेश्चन है मेंस. ठीक है ना, ये ओवरऑल क्वेश्चन है. हमने क्या किया, एग्जामिन क्रिटिकल. देखिए क्वेश्चन क्या है, एग्जामिन क्रिटिकली द वेरियस फेसेट्स ऑफ इकोनॉमिक पॉलिसीज ऑफ ब्रिटिश एंड इंडिया फ्रॉम मिड 18th सेंचुरी टिल इंडिपेंडेंस. ये पूरे ही चैप्टर का क्वेश्चन है बेसिकली. जो इकोनॉमिक पॉलिसी रही है ब्रिटिश की, उन सब के बारे में बताना है, उनका कैसा क्या इम्पैक्ट रहा बेसिकली तो ये पूरे चैप्टर जो आप पढ़ लेंगे ना उसके बाद का ये मेंस का क्वेश्चन है, ठीक है ना। ये आप समझ लीजिए इसमें अच्छे से क्या है। तो आपको मल्टीपल एस्पेक्ट बताने हैं, डी इंडस्ट्रियलाइजेशन से, एग्रीकल्चर से, लैंडलॉर्डिज्म से, ये सब पूरा कंबाइन करके आंसर बनाएंगे। So let's continue reading. Emergence of intermediaries, absentee landlordism, ruins of old zamindars. By 1815, half of the total land in Bengal had passed into the new hands. Merchants, moneylenders, and other moneyed class living in towns knew the new zamindars, which increased power but with little or no avenue for new investment, resorted to land grabbing and sub-infeudation. Increase in number of intermediaries to be paid give rise to absentee landlordism and increase the burden on the peasants. Since the demand for land was high, price went up and so did the liabilities of the peasants. With no traditional or benevolent ties with the tenants, the zamindars had no incentive to invest in the improvement of agriculture. The interest of the zamindars lay only in perpetuation of British rule and in opposing the national movement. Stagnation and deterioration of agriculture, ठीक है। The cultivators had neither the means nor any incentive to invest in agriculture. The zamindar had no roots in the village, while the government spent little on agriculture, technical and mass education, ठीक है ना। Government spent little on agriculture, technical and mass education. Zamindar had no roots in the village. All this together with fragmentation of land due to sub-infeudation. The fragmentation of land due to sub-infeudation made it difficult to introduce modern technology, which caused a perpetually low level productivity, ठीक है ना, perpetually low level productivity. Famine and poverty, ठीक है। Regular resurgence of famines became a common feature of the daily existence in India. Their famines were not just because of the food grain scarcity, but were a direct result of poverty unleashed by colonial forces in India between 1850 and 1900. ये important है, देखिए 1850 से 1900 तक 2.8 करोड़ पीपल डाइड ड्यू टू फैमाइन, ठीक है। अब कमर्शलाइजेशन ऑफ इंडियन एग्रीकल्चर, ठीक है। कमर्शलाइजेशन पे ऑफ कोर्स पूछा गया है, यूपीएससी 2018 में भी क्वेश्चन पूछा गया है। In the later half of the 19th century, another significant trend was the emergence of the commercialization of agriculture. So far, agriculture had been a way of life rather a business enterprise. Now, agriculture began to be influenced by commercial considerations. Certain specialized crops began to be grown not for consumption in villages but for sale in the national and even international market. Commercial crops like cotton, jute, groundnuts, oilseed, ये देखिए ये सही commercial crops, sugar cane, tobacco, etc. were more remunerative than food grains, ठीक है। Again the cultivation of the crops like condiments, spices, fruits and vegetables could cater to a wider market. Perhaps the commercialization trends reached the highest level of development in the plantation sector, that is the tea, coffee, rubber, indigo, etc., which was mostly owned by Europeans and produce was for sale in the wider market. The new market trend of commercialization and specialization was encouraged by many factors: spread of money economy, replacement of customs and traditions by the competition and contract, emergence of the unified national market, growth of internal trade, improvement in the communication through rails and roads, and boost to international trade given by the entry of British finance capital, etc. ठीक है। क्यों हुआ है ये पूरा इसमें दिया हुआ है, ठीक है, ये इंपॉर्टेंट है ये वाला पार्ट, ठीक है। कमर्शलाइजेशन ट्रेंड्स क्यों हुआ है, कमर्शलाइजेशन स्पेशलाइजेशन वाज एनकरेज बाय मैनी फैक्टर्स, ये हैं वो फैक्टर्स, ठीक है ना। ये सारे फैक्टर्स हैं, फैक्टर्स क्या है कमर्शलाइजेशन ऑफ एग्रीकल्चर के, ये सारे, ठीक है। ओके, पढ़ते हैं। फॉर द इंडियन पीजेंट्स कमर्शलाइजेशन सीम्ड अ फोर्स्ड process. There were hardly any surplus for him to invest in the commercial crops, given the substance level at which he lived. While commercialization linked Indian agriculture with international market trends and their fluctuations. For instance, the cotton of 1860 pushed up price, but this mostly benefited the intermediaries. And when the slump in price came in 1866, it hurt the cultivators the most, bringing in its turn heavy indebtedness, famines, and agrarian rights. In the Deccan in 1870, thus the cultivators hardly emerged better from the new commercialization trends, ठीक है ना। सिर्फ इंटरमीडिएट्स को और बिजनेसमैन को फायदा हो रहा था, जो कल्टीवेट कर रहा था एग्रीकल्चरिस्ट उसको फायदा नहीं हो रहा था, किसान को, ठीक है। अब पढ़ेंगे डिस्ट्रक्शन ऑफ इंडस्ट्रीज एंड लेट डेवलपमेंट ऑफ मॉडर्न इंडस्ट्री, ठीक है ना। एक क्वेश्चन देख लेते हैं उसके पहले। ये क्वेश्चन आया हुआ है यूपीएससी 2018 में, राइट। क्वेश्चन क्या है, इकोनॉमिकली वन ऑफ द रिजल्ट ऑफ ब्रिटिश रूल, इकोनॉमिकली of British rule in India in the 19th century was increase in export of Indian handicrafts, गलत। growth of number of Indian owned factories, ये भी गलत। है ना। कमर्शलाइजेशन ऑफ इंडियन एग्रीकल्चर, ये हम पढ़ चुके हैं ऑफ कोर्स। रैपिड इंक्रीज इन द अर्बन पॉपुलेशन, ये भी गलत क्योंकि रूरल इकोनॉमी हो रही, तो मतलब वन ऑफ द है तो यही है ना, मोस्ट सर्टेन। ऑफ कोर्स रूरल अर्बन सेक्टर में जा रहे थे लोग, लेकिन देन अगेन ये ज़्यादा प्रोमिनेंट है, ठीक है ना। तो आंसर है सी, ये हमने अभी पढ़ा है, इसके रीजन हमने ऊपर पढ़ लिए, ठीक है ना। लेट्स मूव ऑन। ओके, डिस्ट्रक्शन ऑफ इंडस्ट्री एंड लेट डेवलपमेंट ऑफ मॉडर्न इंडस्ट्री। Indian industry was steadily destroyed. देखिए, steadily destroyed. This destruction of textile competition of India in a glaring is a glaring example of the deindustrialization of India. The British stopped paying for Indian textile in pounds, choosing instead to pay from the revenue gained from Bengal and at a very low rate, thus impoverishing the peasant further. A thriving shipbuilding industry was crushed. Thriving shipbuilding industry was then again crushed. अब देखिए, कॉटन crushed, है ना, हैंडीक्राफ्ट crushed, पूरा जो भी था, और फिर शिप बिल्डिंग भी crushed. Surat and Malabar on the western coast of Bengal and Masulipatam on the eastern coast were known for their shipbuilding of industries. कौन से? Surat and Malabar were known for shipbuilding, ठीक है। The British ship contract by the company were given a monopoly over the trade routes, while even the Indian merchant ship plying along the coast were made to face heavy duties. In 1813, a law by the British Parliament prohibited ship below 350 tons from sailing between India and Britain. This effectively put a large portion of Bengal built ship out of the commission of the Indo-British trade routes. In 1814, another law was passed under the Indian built ship were refused to be considered British registered vessel, which could trade with America and European continent. So the decline of Indian shipping industry was ensured. The British did not allow the Indian steel industry to grow. Again, Indian steel industry को भी grow करने नहीं दिया. Industries like Tata's, which began to produce steel after a lot of trouble getting the required permission, was restricted by being forced to produce a higher standard of steel for British use. The firm were not able to produce the lower standard of steel at the same time, so they were left out of the larger market that demanded a lower quality of steel. As restrictions were placed by Britain on Indian steel imports, this steel could only be used in India. Obviously, the growth of industry was hampered, right? स्टील मेकिंग इंडस्ट्री को ऐसे बर्बाद किया. इंडियन ट्रेडर्स, मनी लेंडर्स एंड बैंकर्स हैड amassed some wealthy as junior partners of English merchant capitalists in India. Their role fitted in the Bengal scheme of colonial exploitation. The Indian moneylenders provided loans to hard-pressed agriculturists and thus facilitated the state collection of revenue. The Indian traders carried imported British products to the remotest corner and helped in the movement of Indian agriculture products for export. The indigenous bankers helped both in process and distribution. देखिए, इंडियन ट्रेडर्स क्या कर रहे थे? इम्पोर्ट कैरी आउट कर रहे थे हर जगह पे, ठीक है ना. द इंडिजिनस बैंकर्स helped both in process of distribution and collection, but the colonial situation regarded the development of the health and independent industry. Bourgeois and its development was different from other independent countries like Germany and Japan. It was only in the second half of 19th century that the modern machine-based industries started coming up in India. देखिए कब आई? It was only in the second half of the 19th century. Modern machine-based industries started coming to India. The first cotton textile mill set up in 1853 in Bombay by Kovasji Nanabhai, and the first jute mill came up in 1855. पहले आई कौन सी? कॉटन मिल, टेक्सटाइल मिल, और फिर आई जूट मिल, केम अप इन 1855 इन रिशारा बंगाल, ठीक है, रिशरा बंगाल. But most of the modern industries were foreign owned and controlled by British managing agencies. There was a rush of foreign capital in India at this time. ठीक है, rush of foreign capital in India at this time. ये important fact है जो हम आपको याद करवा देंगे, आपको मेंस में भी काम में आएंगे और प्रीलिम्स में ही पूछ लिया तो अच्छी बात. Due to the prospect of high profit, availability of cheap labor, cheap and readily available raw material, ready market in India and neighbors, diminishing avenues of investment at home, willingness of administration to provide all help, and ready market aboard for some Indian exports such as tea, jute and manganese. ठीक है, rush of foreign capital क्यों हुआ? ये रीजन है, ठीक है ना. Indian owned industries came up in cotton, textile and jute in 19th century. Indian owned industries came up in cotton, textile and jute. ठीक है, cotton, textile और jute का अपसर्ज हो रहा था, and in sugar and cement etc. मतलब और भी ये जगह पे in the 20th century. ठीक है. Indian owned industries suffered from many Indian-owned industries suffered from many handicaps, credit problems, no tariff protection by the government, unequal competition from foreign companies, and stiff opposition from British capital interest, who were backed by sound financial, technical infrastructure at home. Right? The colonial factors also caused certain structural and institutional changes. The industrial development was characterized by leposided pattern. Core and heavy industries and power generation were neglected, and some regions were favored more than others. ठीक है ना? Core and heavy industry power sector was neglected and some region favored. ठीक है, ये था. Causing regional disparity. Right? These regional disparities hampered the process of nation building. In the absence of careful nurturing of technical education, the industry lacked sufficient technical manpower. Socially, the rise of an industrial capitalist class and the working class was an important feature of the phase. Right? ठीक है, अब पढ़ते हैं आगे. नेशनलिस्ट क्रिटिक ऑफ कॉलोनियल इकोनॉमी. ठीक है, कौन कौन क्रिटिसाइज कर रहा था कॉलोनियल इकोनॉमी को? बेसिकली वो बोला गया है कैसे क्रिटिसाइज करना है. The early intellectuals of the first half of the 19th century supported British rule under the impression that it would modernize the country based on the latest technology and capitalist economic organization. अब ये थोड़ा सा सुनने में खराब लगेगा, बट ठीक है. Earlier intellectuals first half of the 19th century में ये they were supporting British rule. क्यों? क्योंकि उनको लग रहा था कि मॉडर्नाइज हो जाएगी कंट्री, है ना, टेक्नोलॉजिकली और कैपिटलिस्ट इकोनॉमिक ऑर्गेनाइजेशन से भरपूर हो जाएंगे. ठीक है ना. आफ्टर द 1860 after the 1860 delusionment started to set in among the political conscious, and they began to probe into the reality of the British rule in India. The foremost among the economic analysts was Dadabhai Naoroji. बहुत important, the grand old man of India. इनसे related questions हम पहले पढ़ चुके हैं. ठीक है. Who after a brilliant analysis on the colonial poverty put forward the theory of economic drain इन पॉवर्टी एंड अन ब्रिटिश रूल ऑफ इंडिया. इनकी राइटिंग थी, ये इकोनॉमिक ड्रेन की थ्योरी बताई थी. ये पूछ चुके हैं हम यूपीपीसीएस और अलग अलग एग्जाम्स में. ठीक है ना, ये इंपॉर्टेंट है, ऑफ कोर्स प्रीवियस ईयर क्वेश्चन है. तो अदर इकोनॉमिक एनालिस्ट इंक्लूडेड जस्टिस महादेव गोविंद रानडे, रोमेश चंद्र दत्ता. ठीक है, महादेव गोविंद रानडे, रोमेश चंद्र दत्ता. द इकोनॉमिक हिस्ट्री ऑफ इंडिया लिखी थी इनने. गोपाल कृष्ण गोखले, जी सुब्रमण्यम अय्यर एंड पृथ्वीश चंद्र रे. The essence of 19th century colonialism, they said, lay in the transformation of India into a supplier of foodstuff and raw material to the metropolis, a market for metropolitan manufacturers, and a field for investment of British capital. These early nationalist analysts organized intellectual agitation and advocated for a complete surveillance of India's economic subvergence to Britain and the development of an independent economy based on modern industries. Right? Okay, ये पढ़ लेते हैं थोड़ा सा. Economic drain क्या है? The term economic drain refers to the portion of national product of India which was not available for consumption of its people but was being drained away to Britain for political reasons, and India was not getting adequate economic and material returns for it. ये है economic drain की definition. पोर्शन ऑफ नेशनल प्रोडक्ट, ये यहाँ से लेके बेसिकली यहाँ तक. ठीक है ना. ये द ड्रेन थ्योरी वाज पुट फॉरवर्ड बाय दादाभाई नौरोजी इन हिज बुक पॉवर्टी एंड ब्रिटिश रूल इन इंडिया. द मेजर कंपोनेंट्स ऑफ द ड्रेन वाज सैलरीज एंड पेंशंस. कौन से उनके कंपोनेंट थे? ऑफ सिविल एंड मिलिट्री ऑफिसर्स, इंटरेस्ट ऑन लोन्स taken by the Indian government from abroad, profits and foreign investment, stores purchased in Britain for civil and military department, payments to be made for shipping, banking and insurance services, which stunned the growth of Indian enterprise in these services. The drain of wealth checked and retarded capital formation in India, while the same portion of wealth accelerated the growth of British economy. The surplus from British economy re-entered India as a finance capital, further draining India of its wealth. This had immense effect on income and employment potential. Right, तो आगे बढ़ते हैं. British policies making India poor. The basic assertion of these earlier intellectuals was that India was poor and growing poorer due to the British imperialism, and since the cause of India's economic backwardness were man-made, they were explainable and removable. The problem of poverty was seen as a problem of raising productive capacity and energy of the people, or as a problem of national development, and thus making poverty a national issue. This helped in rallying all sections of the society around common economic issues. Also, development was equated with industrialization. This industrialization was to be based on Indian and not foreign capital, because according to the early nationalists, foreign capital replaced and suppressed instead of augmenting and encouraging Indian capital. Right? This suppression caused economic drain, further strengthened the British hold over India. The political consequences of foreign capital investment were equally harmful, as they caused political subjugation and created vested interest which sought security for investors, thus perpetuating the foreign rule. ठीक है, ग्रोथ ऑफ ट्रेड एंड रेलवे टू हेल्प ब्रिटिश, ठीक है ना, टू हेल्प ब्रिटेन. These analysts exposed the force of British arguments that the growth of foreign trade and railway implied development for India. They pointed out that the pattern of foreign trade was unfavorable to India. ठीक है, pattern of foreign trade was unfavorable to India. This relegated India to a position of importer of finished good and exporter of raw material. बहुत important, importer of finished good and exporter of raw material and foodstuffs. ठीक है. And the development of railway, that argued, was not coordinated with India's industrial need, and it ushered in the commercial rather than an industrial revolution. ठीक है ना, did not coordinate with the India's industrial need. ठीक है ना, ये याद रखेंगे आप. हमारे लिए नहीं था, वो उनके लिए था. बेसिकली ये सारे व्यूज हैं. Effect of the railways was to enable foreign goods to outsell indigenous products. Further, the benefit from the impetus to steel, machinery, and capital investment in railway accrued to the British. G.V. Joshi remarked, expenditure on railway should be seen as an Indian subsidy to British industry. ठीक है. One-way free trade and tariff policy. The nationalists claimed that one-way free trade was ruining the industrial handicraft industry, exposing it to the premature, unequal, and unfair competition, while tariff policy was guided by British capitalist interest. ठीक है ना, क्या था इंडियन ये देखिए, वन वे फ्री ट्रेड था. ठीक है, हमें तो यहाँ से देना पड़ रहा था भाई, एक्सपोर्ट करने पे ड्यूटी, इंपोर्ट करने पे कुछ नहीं था, तो वहाँ से बहुत सस्ते माल आ रहा था. ठीक है. On the finance front, taxes were levied to overburden the poor, sparing British capitalists and the bureaucrats. They demanded reduction of land revenue, abolition of sales tax, imposition of income tax and excise duties on consumer goods consumed by the rich middle class. The government expenditure, it was argued, was meant to serve colonial needs only, while development and welfare were ignored. ठीक है ना, गवर्नमेंट एक्सपेंडिचर को सिर्फ कॉलोनियल नीड्स के अकॉर्डिंग यूज किया जा रहा था और डेवलपमेंट और वेलफेयर को भूल जाया जा रहा था. Effect of economic drain. The drain theory incorporated all threads of the nationalist critique that it denuded India of its productive capital. According to the nationalist estimate, the economic drain at that time was more than the total land revenue. Economic drain देखिए कितना ज़्यादा था, more than the total land revenue, जितना भी पूरा land revenue था उससे, और half of the total government revenue. 1/3 of the total saving. In today's terms, it amounted to 8% of the national product. The concept of drain, one country taking away wealth from another country, was easily grasped by the nation of peasants for whom exploitation was a matter of daily experience. ठीक है ना, इतना ज़्यादा इकोनॉमिक ड्रेन हो रहा था. ओके, दिस आर अगेन द व्यूज. ठीक है. इकोनॉमिक इशू अ स्टिमुलेंट टू नेशनल अनरेस्ट. The nationalist agitation on economic issue served to undermine the ideological hegemony of alien rulers over the Indian minds, that the foreign rule was in the interest of Indians, thus exposing the myth of the moral foundation. It was also shown clearly that India was poor because it was being ruled by British interest. India was poor because it was being ruled by British interest. This agitation was one of the stimulants of intellectual unrest and spread of national consciousness during the moderate phase of freedom struggle, 1857 से 1905 में, the seed time of national movement. ठीक है. Till the end of the 19th century, the nationalists had been demanding some share in political power and control over the purse. During the first decade of 20th century, they started demanding self-rule like United Kingdom or the colonies and prominent among such nationalists were दादा भाई नारोजी, दोस्त दादा भाई नारोजी, ठीक है, और भी थे ऑफ कोर्स। अब पढ़ते हैं स्टेजेस ऑफ कॉलोनाइजेशन, इंपॉर्टेंट है। Okay, stages of colonialism in India. The fundamental character of British rule in India did not remain the same through its long history of nearly 2 centuries. The changing pattern of Britain's position in the world economy led to the change in the nature of British colonialism. Marxist historian, especially Rajni Palme identified 3 overlapping stages in the history of imperialist rule in India. कौन ने? इनने 3 stages थे imperialist rule के इंडिया में। He points out that each stage developed out of the condition of the previous stage, and the different modes of colonial exploitation overlapped. Old forms of colonial exploitation never entirely ceased, but got integrated into new pattern of exploitation. These stages are, however, marked by distinct dominant features, that is, qualitative changes from one stage to another. फर्स्ट स्टेज क्या रही है? देखिए फर्स्ट स्टेज क्या है? द पीरियड ऑफ मर्चेंट कैपिटल या फिर मर्केंटाइलिज्म, ऑफन डिस्क्राइब्ड एज द पीरियड ऑफ मोनोपोली ट्रेड एंड डायरेक्ट अप्रोप्रिएशन, और द पीरियड ऑफ ईस्ट इंडिया कंपनीज डोमिनेशन 1857 से 13 तक, was based on 2 basic objectives. पहला क्या था? To acquire the monopoly of trade in India against other English and European merchants or trading companies, as well as against the Indian merchants. Second था direct appropriate or take over governmental revenue through control over state power. During this period, no basic changes were introduced in the administration, judicial system, transport and communication method of agriculture or industrial production, form of business management or economic organization. No basic changes, ठीक है ना? Nor were any major changes made in education or intellectual field, culture or social organization, nor were no major changes, ठीक है? In fact, the traditional Indian civilization, religion, law, caste system, family structure, etc. were not seen as obstacles in the colonial exploitation. The only changes made, कौन कौन से changes लाए गए थे? The पहला था the military organization. In a military organization and technology which native rulers were also introducing in their armed forces, in administration at the top of the structure of revenue collection, so that it could become more efficient and smooth. In this phase, there was a large scale drain of wealth from India, which constituted 2 to 3% of British national economy at the time. It was this wealth that played an important role in financing Britain's industrial revolution. In this stage, ये इंपॉर्टेंट है लाइन, ठीक है, ब्रिटेन का इंडस्ट्रियल रेवोल्यूशन हम फंड कर रहे थे, ठीक है। वेट, in this stage there was no large scale import of British manufacturers into India, rather the reverse occurred. There was an increase in export of Indian textile. The weavers were however ruined at this stage by the company's monopoly and exploitation. They were forced to produce for company under uneconomic compulsions, ठीक है। सेकेंड स्टेज क्या थी? owning to its mode of exploitation being trade. This stage is also termed as colonialism of free trade. ठीक है, ये आप याद रखेंगे। It started with the Charter Act of 1813 and continued till 1860. Started यहाँ देख लीजिए। Soon after the East India Company became the ruler of most part of the India, there was a debate in Britain as to whose interests the newly acquired colony would serve. The newly emerging industrial capitalists began to criticize the East India Company and its exploitation of India. They demanded that colonial administration and policy in India should now serve British capitalist interests, which were very different from those of East India Company. Now India was to serve as a market for the ever increasing output of British manufactured goods, especially textile. At the same time, the new capitalists in England needed from India exports of raw material, especially cotton and food grains. Moreover, India could buy more British goods only if it entered foreign exchange by enhancing its export. The export of raw material was increased. The export of raw material was increased sharply to meet the dividends of company and profit of British merchants. ठीक है। Besides, there was a need of money to pay the pensions of British officials who could go to Britain after retirement. In this phase, the following dominant features were visible. कौन कौन से features थे? Dominant features. India's colonial economy was integrated with the British and the world capitalist economy as the world capitalist economy, right? This was made possible with the introduction of free trade. यहाँ पे आप याद रखेंगे, all import duties in India were either totally removed or drastically reduced to nominal rates. Free entry was also granted to British capitalists to develop tea, coffee. देखिए free entry टी कॉफी और इंडिगो प्लांटेशन के लिए, ट्रेड, ट्रांसपोर्ट, माइनिंग एंड मॉडर्न इंडस्ट्रीज इन इंडिया. The British Indian government gave active state help to such capitalists. Permanent settlement and Rayatwari in agriculture introduced to transform traditional agrarian structure into a capitalist one. ये हम पढ़ चुके हैं. Administration was made more comprehensive and included villages and outlying areas of the country. ठीक है. These changes were brought about to make British goods reach and agricultural products drawn from interior village and remotest part. Personal law was largely left untouched since it did not affect colonial transformation of the economy. However, the changes related to criminal law, laws of contract and legal procedure were overhauled to promote capitalist commercial relation and maintain law and order. Modern education was introduced to provide cheap manpower to the vastly expanded administration. ठीक है ना. मॉडर्न एजुकेशन पे भी काम कर रहे थे. However, it was also aimed at transforming India's society and culture for two reasons. पहला क्या था? Create an overall atmosphere of change and development, give birth to the culture of loyalty to the rulers. फिर क्या है? The taxation and the burden of peasantry rose sharply due to economic transformation and costly administration, civil as well as military. India absorbed 10 to 12% of the British exports, nearly 20% of the British textile export after 1850. फैक्ट है यहाँ पे, ठीक है ना. थोड़ा सा मेंस में आपको काम आते हैं ये वाले फैक्ट. आफ्टर 1850 इकोनॉमिक इंजन कोच रेल लाइन्स एंड अदर रेलवे स्टोर्स were imported into India at a larger scale. फिर है the Indian army was used for British expansion of colonialism in Asia and Africa. राइट, यहाँ तक हमने कंप्लीट कर लिया है. ओके, अब है थर्ड स्टेज और फिर ये चैप्टर ख़त्म. ठीक है, थर्ड स्टेज हम पढ़ेंगे अब अगले वाले वीडियो में. सो यहाँ तक अभी इसको कंप्लीट. वेट, ठीक है, मेरे पास टाइम है. थर्ड स्टेज, द थर्ड स्टेज ऑफ ऑफन डिस्क्राइब्ड एज एन एरा फॉर एन इन्वेस्टमेंट एंड इंटरनेशनल कॉम्पिटिशन ऑफ द कॉलोनीज. इट बिगेन अराउंड 1860 in India, owing to the several changes in the world economy. These changes were as follows. ब्रिटेन, क्या क्या चेंजेस थे? Britain industrial supremacy was challenged by the several countries of Europe, United States, and Japan. As a result of application of scientific knowledge to industry, the pace of the industrialization increased sharply. Use of petroleum as a fuel for the internal combustion engines and the use of electricity for industrial purpose were significant innovation. The world market became more unified due to the revolution in the means of international transport. During this stage, Britain made strenuous efforts to consolidate its control over India. Liberal imperialist policies got replaced with reactionary imperialist policies, which were reflected in the viceroyalty of Lytton, Dufferin, Lansdowne, and Curzon. The strengthening of the colonial rule over India was meant to keep over the rival as well as attract the British capital to India and provide its security. As a result, a very large amount of British capital got invested in railways, loans to the government of India, trade, and to lesser extent in plantation, coal mining, jute mills, shipping, banking, etc. The notion of training the Indian people for self-government vanished, revealed only in 1918 because of the pressure exerted by the Indian national movement. Now the aim of the British rule was declared as permanent trusteeship. ठीक है ना, इंपॉर्टेंट है अगेन. परमानेंट ट्रस्टीशिप ओवर द Indians were declared to permanently mature a child people needing retain control and trusteeship. Geography, climate, race, history, religion, culture, and social organization were all cited as factors in making the Indian unfit for self-government or democracy. The British thus tried to justify their rule over Indians for centuries to come, all in the name of civilizing our barbaric people, the white man's burden. ठीक है ना, समझ गए आप? ओके, तो यहाँ पे ये चैप्टर होता है खत्म. इसके हम समरी पढ़ लेते हैं फटाफट. ओके, इकोनॉमिक इम्पैक्ट ऑफ ब्रिटिश रूल इन इंडिया पढ़ा. तो क्या था? डी इंडस्ट्रियलाइजेशन हुआ, रून्स ऑफ आर्टिसन एंड हैंडीक्राफ्ट्समैन, इस पर क्वेश्चन भी देखा. एम्पावरमेंट ऑफ पीजेंट्री, रूरलाइजेशन ऑफ इंडिया, इस पर भी क्वेश्चन देखा. इमरजेंस ऑफ न्यू लैंड रिलेशन, यूज ऑफ ओल्ड जमींदार, स्टैग्नेशन एंड डिटरेटेशन ऑफ एग्रीकल्चर, क्वेश्चन देखा है. कमर्शलाइजेशन ऑफ इंडियन एग्रीकल्चर, डेवलपमेंट ऑफ मॉडर्न इंडस्ट्री, राइज ऑफ इंडियन नेशनल बुर्गीज, इकोनॉमिक ड्रेन, फेमाइन एंड पॉवर्टी, इसके ऊपर टोटल के ऊपर मेंस का क्वेश्चन देखा हुआ है. नेशनल क्रिटिक्स क्या थे? इंडिया गेटिंग पुअर ड्यू टू द कॉलोनियल एक्सप्लॉयटेशन, प्रॉब्लम ऑफ पॉवर्टी, नेशनल मूवमेंट ऑफ राइजिंग productive capacities and energies. Development equated with industrialization which should take place through Indians, not foreign capital. ठीक है, ये भी हमने पढ़ा है. British policy on trade, finance, infrastructure development, expenditure designed to serve imperialistic interest. Need for complete servants of India's economic subversions to Britain and development of independent economy. ठीक है ना, यहाँ पे ये चैप्टर होता है खत्म. ठीक है, हम इस चैप्टर में बहुत सारी लैंग्वेज में समझ रहा हूँ कि बहुत सारा रीडिंग वाला पार्ट है, क्योंकि ये मेंस से रिलेटेड ज़्यादा है, क्योंकि इसके रिलेटेड प्रीलिम्स के फैक्ट हम पहले पढ़ चुके हैं, इससे रिलेटेड क्वेश्चन कर चुके हैं. तो आप थोड़ा धैर्य बना के रखिए. बेसिकली इसमें आपको समझने की ज़्यादा ज़रूरत है कि आपको इससे रिलेटेड क्वेश्चन आए, जैसे यूपीएससी वगैरह और यूपीपी से कभी कभी स्टेटमेंट्स वाले क्वेश्चन पूछ लेते हैं या फिर रीजन असर्शन पूछ लेते हैं, तो वो इस वाले पार्ट से आते हैं. बट मेजरली यहाँ से मेंस के क्वेश्चन आपसे बन सकते हैं. ठीक है ना, इकोनॉमिक पॉलिसी के कैसा ड्रेन किया इंडिया को, तो उसके लिए बहुत सारा लैंग्वेज वाला पार्ट यहाँ पे ज़्यादा, कि बहुत सारा वर्डिंग बहुत सारा. ठीक है, क्वेश्चंस और इंपॉर्टेंट प्रीलिम्स के फैक्ट नहीं है, बट ये पूरा चैप्टर भी इंपॉर्टेंट है. राइट, तो यहाँ पे हमने ये चैप्टर कंप्लीट कर लिया है. इन द नेक्स्ट वीडियो वी विल स्टार्ट चैप्टर 29, डेवलपमेंट ऑफ इंडियन प्रेस. ठीक है, वी आर क्लोज टू द एंड. राइट, सो टिल देन स्टे कनेक्टेड.